Okay, how to find a domain and range. The first type we're going to talk about is the function where you actually end up with a straight line. Y is equal to x, or f of x is equal to mx plus b. Whenever you have y to the first power and x to the first power, you will always have a straight line. So, you'll know with a straight line. An example could be something such as if I have y is equal to 2x plus 3, we know that we can actually draw that as going to be a straight line because the y and the x to the first power. I can go up 1, 2, 3, plot my point. Here's my slope, rise over run. Start from here, go up 2 more and over 1, and there's my straight line. Now, whenever you have a straight line, what will happen is that your domain will be all real numbers, and your range is also all real numbers. Now, when you're looking at that, you may be trying to figure out why. Remember that, okay, here's my straight line. Whenever I'm talking about a domain, I'm talking about the x-axis, which happens to be here. If you notice, this is my x-axis and this is my line. When you look at that, if I look at all my points that are on my x-axis, they will actually touch the line at one point. And remember, this line goes on and on. And also here, it only touches at one point. So therefore, it's going to be all the numbers on the number line are all real numbers. Now let's take a look and do the same thing, this time with the range. The range consists of the y-axis. And here's my line once again. If you take a look, no matter where you are on your y-axis, you'll only touch it at one space, which happens to be here. Therefore, on my y-axis, that would be all real numbers. Remember that whenever you have a straight line, which means my y and my x are to the first power, your domain and range will be all real numbers. Now let's take a look at another figure. We know from the previous video that y is equal to x squared is a parabola. And a parabola is shaped in a U shape. Well, let's take a look and see if we can find the domain and the range for a parabola. Okay, once again, remember that the x-axis determines our domain. And here's my figure. Looks like this. Well, when I have my parabola, notice every point on my y-axis, and it'll keep going on, will actually touch at one space on my parabola. Therefore, it looks as though my domain for my parabola is going to be all real numbers. Okay, but now let's take a look at, here's my U shape, and here is now my range, or my y-axis, and it starts here. Notice here, when you're only looking at the y-axis, that it only touches as I'm going up. But notice, this happens to be 0 here. What happens when we go into the negative numbers, like -1, -2? Notice there is no parabola. So therefore, my range is going to be all real numbers. But where does it start from? It starts at 0. Real numbers greater than or equal to 0. So there's my domain and range. Now let's take a look at another one. Y is equal to, this time, a negative x squared, and let's do plus 3. First of all, when you have a negative in front of the x squared, your parabola is going to go in the upside down. And plus 3 is telling us where the vertex will be. So therefore, when I draw this, I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, but this time I'm going to go in a downward position. Notice, define the domain. Once again, no matter where you go on your x-axis, you're going to run into your parabola. So it looks as though my domain, once again, is going to be all real numbers. So that's okay. But where the difference is going to come in is dealing with my range. Notice, the vertex at the top of it actually goes up 3. So therefore, it looks like it's going to be all real numbers. Notice here, it's going in the downward position, so it's less than or equal to 3. So that would actually be our range. Now, how would I write that as interval notation? As an interval notation, let's take a look. All real numbers. What's going to happen is that I'm going to have this means to continue in this direction, and I'm going to go in this direction with my negative forever and ever. That's an infinity. And then I'm also going on my x-axis forever ever in my positive direction, and you'll want to have the shape like this. Now, what happens then with the range? Oops, sorry. Notice, it's less than or equal to 3. So therefore, we know that we have 3, and you'll have to put it'll look like this on the end because it's saying it stops at 3, but then it's going into the less than, which is in the negative direction, and then once again I will put because that means less than. Okay, let's look at another type of a figure. Now, another figure is the absolute value. When you have the absolute value, the absolute value, the figure is always going to be a V shape. So notice here, which is very similar actually to the parabola, this is absolute value, is that if I look at the domain for this, it's going to also be, once again, all real numbers. And for the range, I'm going to look for my vertex, which happens to be here. So it looks like it's going to be all real numbers greater than or equal to 0. Okay? And if I have y is equal to this time a negative on the outside, what's going to happen to the V shape is actually going to flip downwards. If you happen to have this time y is equal to, let's say, a negative absolute value of x minus 3, well, how would you draw that? Well, first of all, my vertex will start at what? Negative 3. 1, 2, 3. And it's going to go down, and because it's absolute value, I know it's going to look like this. So therefore, once again, my domain will be all real numbers, and my range this time, if you notice, the vertex on the y-axis is started at negative 3, so therefore it's going to be all real numbers, but it's going to be what? Less than negative 3. Less than or equal to negative 3. So if I was going to write this as a interval notation, all real numbers, once again, for my domain, I would write, so parentheses, negative, because that means it's going in the negative direction this way, comma, and then a positive. So that means it's going to go on and on forever, which represents all real numbers. Now my range, it's a little different. If you notice, it's all numbers less than negative 3. And remember, we start off, we're going to have a negative 3, which is here, and because we're going in the negative direction, I have a negative infinity, and then I'll put that connotation, which is there. That means including negative 3, but less than negative 3. That's going in the negative direction. So let's recap everything about our shapes. If you have something that is to the first power, you have a straight line. If you have y, which is equal to, notice y to the first power, x to the second power, you end up with a parabola. And the shape will never change. Remember, it's a U shape. And if you end up having the absolute value, you have a V shape. So these are the main shapes that you will be using when you're working with functions, finding the domain and the ranges.